Hey, Year 11. I want to go through with you the opening passage or the opening section of Fahrenheit 451. You should have read that already yourself, and that is going from page 9 to 17 in this version of the book. Here I've got a PDF version which I've gone through and annotated, and I want to go through my annotations with you now. So the important things that we're looking at here is how this text is setting up, is using language, plot elements to set up the scene, and then we will compare that with Nosedive and see whether the concerns that are coming out are the same, whether the characters are characterized in the same way, etc. So let's start here. I'm just going to take you through, you can see all of my different annotations throughout. So have your book open and you can copy in some of my annotations as you go, and just pause this video as you're taking your notes so that you're following along. All right, so I want to start here with "It was a pleasure to burn," the opening line, a powerful line of the entire book, and I've written here that we can contrast that, contrast that to Montag's reaction to burning later in the novel. So we know that, I just lost that. All right, he knows at this point in time that he enjoys burning mindlessly. This entire first section is just about how his hands aren't really his hands. Like, he feels kind of disjointed from this moment. He is just so fully immersed that there's no thought processes actually taking place. I want you to note throughout this opening section that he's watching things be eaten. He's watching them blacken. Down here, there's a gorging fire. And these words are, they're about consumption and they're about destruction. So things are being literally consumed by fire and destroyed by this fire, gorged, blackened, changed, burned. And you've also got this symbolism through here of the snake. And throughout the text, we see the idea of snakes coming through the fire hoses of the kerosene, the pump that pumps out Mildred's insides. They're these slithering snakes. And when we think about snakes, we think poison, we think predators, we think slippery. And I mean, if we went back in terms of literature in the Bible, you've got Adam and Eve are tempted by the snake, which is the devil. So snakes are often associated with some kind of evil. So we've got this idea that the fireman here and technology, in a sense, is being seen as evil and portrayed that way through the symbols. And you've got all through this section really strong imagery, symphonies of blazing and burning, tatters and charcoal ruins. His eyes are all orange flame, the symbolic helmet, gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. So in terms of the imagery here, it's in vivid detail, and I think what Bradbury's trying to do for us here is really emphasize the monstrosity of this moment. At no point in this opening is Montag named. He's not a man here, he's a fireman, and that's really important. He's kind of just a nobody doing this job, and he's being consumed by this moment. Finally, in this section, we've got more imagery here of the idea of books as birds, flapping pigeon-winged books died. And throughout the entire book, books are referred to as birds and their pages as wings. Now, when we think of birds and wings, the idea of flying, the idea of freedom coming through that, and perhaps even escape. So books here are representing flight, escape, freedom, whereas fire is destruction. All right, next page. This section, we've got a real contrast to Nosedive, because he's talking about here how Montag grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that later he might wink at himself, a minstrel man burnt corked in the mirror. And I think that here we've got this really nice parallel between Montag viewing himself in a mirror and fake smiling, and Lacey viewing herself in a mirror, fake smiling. It's a fake forced smile. Then we've got this long passage here, which is all about him just walking home. And it's basically just this big list of him mindlessly walking home. A couple of times I've noted here you've got whistling, and down here he's whistling. And when I think of someone whistling, you know, his hands are in his pocket and he's just whistling down the street, I'm kind of thinking of a mindlessness there. He's at ease. He's not thinking, like he's just burnt a house down. And he's not thinking about the consequences of that. And he's just done his job whistling on his way home. So Montag here, in terms of how he's being characterized, is quite mindless at the moment. He's not realizing what's going on around him. So the imagery here, it's listing everything he's doing in great detail. For now, he's a good boy. He's a good fireman. He's just sliding down the pole, neatly putting his jacket away, whistling on his way home, getting on the subway. It's just this kind of slow, methodical way as he's going from the fire station to home. Throughout this section, it kind of emphasizes the fact that the air is silent, it's soundless, the still night air down here. So the streets are dead, they're quiet, and I think that that is supposed to represent the death, like how dead and quiet society actually is. There's no one about, there's no one socializing, it's just dead air. And he's just walking home until he meets Clarice, and suddenly the night is no longer dead and quiet, it's full of life because she is full of life. And look at this great quote here, thinking little at all about nothing in particular. He's not thinking. So when we're talking about the establishment of Montag as a character at the beginning of this text, he is an empty vessel. He's vapid, much like Mildred. All right. I think this is interesting. So he's like feeling a presence here, feels like someone's been watching him, but he can't put his finger on it. And then it says he turned a corner. And I wonder whether this is symbolic. You know that phrase, he's turned a corner, like he's recovering, or they're starting a new path. So I wonder how symbolic it is that as he's turned a corner, he sees Clarice, and so now begins our story. Clarice is constantly spoken about in terms of being white, like how white and bright she is. Milk white here, pale surprise. Her dress was white, the white stir of her face. And so white, that's repeated throughout, and white often represents purity and innocence. It also says here that in her face is a gentle kind of hunger. And I think that this is really interesting that she's got this gentle hunger because she's curious, she wants knowledge. Whereas just on the previous page, the fire was hungry too, but it was gorging, it was eating, it was like greedily taking everything to the point of destruction. Whereas someone like Clarice, who is simply curious, it's not a destructive hunger at all. Okay. In this section, instead she stood regarding Montag with eyes so dark and shining and alive, he felt he had said something quite wonderful. She's seeing him in this moment, and it's this wonderful thing for him. He feels seen for the first time. But she is kind of, it says here, she's hypnotized by the salamander. She's raised her eyes from his professional symbols. She's stuttering. She says in awe, she's not really seeing the man at the moment. She's kind of just seeing the fireman, the uniform. She's kind of scared of him right now. This is an interesting quote. If you haven't highlighted it, you should. The smell of kerosene, you never wash it off completely. You know, when we can't wash ourselves clean, we're guilty, we're complicit, we're responsible, maybe we're traumatized, he can't get rid of it. Again, she's looking at him, and he feels like she is turning him end from end, shaking him quietly and emptying his pockets without once moving herself. All she's doing is looking at him, but he feels exposed because for the first time in a long time, someone's really looking at him. Here he says, kerosene is nothing but perfume to me. Obviously, later in the text, we know that it makes him vomit, so that's a nice kind of point of comparison. And throughout this text here, it goes through the fact that it really emphasizes the fact that Clarisse is thinking. She never offers an answer without thinking of it clearly, and that's repeated throughout, that she's thoughtful, she's thinking, she's contemplating, all like that's repeated. So you can talk about that in terms of a literary device. Next page, she says, I'm 17 and I'm crazy. I like to smell things and look at things and sometimes stay up all night walking and watching the sunrise. So are these things crazy? You know, like to you or I? No, they're not. But in that world, you know, where she's actually bothering to look properly, she's deemed to be crazy. Now suddenly she's not afraid of Montag at all. She's not afraid of him because she realizes you're just a man. So she's seeing beyond the uniform now. She sees the man and he sees himself seen by her. And again, it's just emphasizing, you know, fragile milk crystal. And it's talking here about the idea of he feels exposed, but not exposed by a harsh light. He feels exposed by like a gentle candlelight. So it's like the different types of light and how Clarisse is a gentle presence for him. Do you ever read any of the books you burn? He laughed. That's against the law. Now, she's asking very dangerous questions here. She's actually probing him, which people don't do. Remember, it's not safe to think for yourself. And I want you, like, as you're reading this section, consider how often Montag laughs in this conversation, and then perhaps think to yourself some of the reasons about why he's laughing. You know, is he uncomfortable? Is he thinking that what she's saying is just so preposterous that it is laughable? Different ideas could come out there. Here, she's asking, you know, is it true that long ago Feynman put out fires instead of starting them? No, he's laughing at her. Trust me, we've always burnt houses. He's wrong, but he's just blindly accepting what he's been told. And he doesn't like that she's questioning him. You're an odd one. Haven't you any respect? Someone's daring to question him, a fireman, and that stops him in his tracks. He stops and he's pointing at her, you know, kind of like, you're weird, you're different, stop. You think too many things, said Montag uneasily. So Clarisse is quite dangerous because she's a free thinker. And we've discussed this idea before, the idea that no one sees anything. They're so consumed with their own lives that they've actually lost sight of the world around them. Here, I rarely watch the parlour walls or go to races or fun parks, so I have a lot of time for crazy thoughts, I guess. So she's not like Mildred. This is what Mildred does all day. She watches TV, watches the walls, and just gets like, you know, distracted by things, but Clarisse doesn't. She thinks, she wonders, she sees. Look here at these lines here. I didn't know that, Montag laughed. He suddenly couldn't remember, and it makes him irritable. He hadn't looked for a long time. These lines here are Montag slowly realising actually how empty he is. We're most peculiar because they talk. But what do you talk about? He can't fathom it. It's bizarre. And then we get this final foreshadowing. Are you happy? And we know that no, he's not happy. And the remainder of the book is going to explore him coming to that realization and trying to find meaning in his life. So this is thematic foreshadowing for us here. So part 1, make sure that you've got some annotations happening in your own books and then make notes in the table that I've given you. Thanks, guys.